Brooke turns down Nick's proposal without flinching, but she doesn't leave a vacuum. She draws a line on the calendar for Ridge and says the decision has to be real, timed, and public. That single move changes the weather across Los Angeles, and Taylor feels it immediately. She understands the pattern, she recognizes the pull, and she refuses to be folded back into a story where wait and see is the whole plan. So she does what no one expects from a woman who has been painted as the soft option. She writes rules. Not a speech, not a plea, not a grand romantic gesture, an operating manual for her life going forward, a boundary rulebook with teeth that applies to anyone who wants in, including Ridge Forrester. It's clinical in the best way, direct and enforceable, a bridge between her training and her history. She drafts without drama and with absolute clarity. Full transparency on every point of contact that carries emotional weight, from work drop-ins to late-night texts, a shared calendar that marks not just meetings, but context for those meetings, a simple, non-negotiable check-in protocol when the past and the present collide at events, after-hours fittings, and spontaneous crises, a zero-surprise clause for private reunions with former lovers or partners. If there's a conversation to be had, it gets scheduled, disclosed, and documented so no one is blindsided. A family firewall that prevents personal conflict from being outsourced to the children. A work firewall that bars major company decisions on days when family turmoil is active, so that no board vote is colored by whoever cried last. A media protocol that stops the cycle of comment first, process later. And an accountability ladder that starts with a verbal reset, escalates to a written warning, and ends with an exit if patterns repeat. She adds one more line that matters more than all the others, the sincerity pact. On the deadline Brooke set, Ridge will either sign in person, in front of Taylor, Brooke, and their children, or he will decline and accept the consequence. There's no third path. The pact is plain language by design. It requires accuracy, not performance. Ridge will attest that he is not in two relationships at once emotionally or logistically. He will agree to disclose any contact with Brooke that intersects with romance or memory within 24 hours, the same for any contact with Taylor if he is with Brooke. He will avoid meetings in private spaces where ambiguity thrives. He will keep his phone available during business travel and share itineraries that can be verified. He will set a monthly time, witnessed by a neutral third party if necessary, to assess the state of the relationship so problems don't metastasize under polite silence. He will acknowledge that if he cannot or will not comply, the relationship ends cleanly and respectfully without blame shifting. There is no penalty clause for honesty, only for secrecy. Taylor prints it on thick stock, signs her own name first under commitment to self, and then sits with her children and goes through the terms line by line. Steffi doesn't just approve, she champions it. She has watched her mother live through too many cycles where the person with the most history gets the most grace. She wants structure, not slogans, and she wants Ridge to meet a standard instead of an impulse. Thomas, who has always lived with the consequences of adult chaos, nods hard at the family firewall. He doesn't want Douglas or any younger sibling pulled into proxy battles. He wants dates to be dates, meetings to be meetings, and children to be children. The rulebook lands with wait the minute it exists. Forrester Creations talks about it in hallways as if it's a new line launch. The press sniffs at it and decides there's no scandal in healthy boundaries, at least not yet. Brooke reads every word and surprises the room. She doesn't call it controlling. She calls it grown-up. The only place she pushes is the timeline. She holds to her deadline for Ridge to choose because ambiguity devours people and companies, and she won't feed it. She declines Nick's ring with respect, not resentment, and says out loud that she won't marry one man while another remains unfinished business. That honesty doesn't make her soft on Ridge, it makes her sharper. The clock ticks and the city gets loud. Bill Spencer treats the pact like a ratings event in his morning meeting and orders clean copy, no slime, because even he can see that savaging a boundary document will backfire. Katie watches the churn and quietly checks on Will, who has his own life to live without being dragged into adult deadlines. Donna keeps Eric insulated from the chatter so his focus stays on health and heritage. Hope, burned by comparisons in the past, gives Taylor a nod in the elevator that says, "I see the strength here," and then refuses to be pulled into panel shows that want a Logan versus Taylor soundbite. RJ syncs the tech for the shared calendar because he can solve a problem without stepping into the triangle. Deacon hears about the signing plan over espresso at Il Giardino and says the inevitable: good relationships have terms, bad ones have traps, pick a lane. The day before the deadline, Taylor presents the final version to Ridge alone, without ceremony. She tells him he can propose edits if he finds places where practicality is underserved by principle. He reads silently, then out loud, then silently again. He circles nothing because the document isn't out to catch him, it's out to protect everyone. He says it feels like a contract. She says it is, and that love without terms is what got them all here. He asks if Brooke will be present at the signing because the thought of pledging transparency about Brooke in front of Brooke makes his ribs ache. Taylor says yes. That's the point. No more shadow courtrooms. No more whispered corrections after a public show. The people most affected will watch you tell the truth. He goes home, doesn't sleep, and shows up the next morning early to the showroom that has been turned into a conference space. No flowers, no quartet, no PR signage. Just a table, 3 chairs, a notary, and family on either side with the restraint of people who know a single word could tip the room. Steffi and Thomas stand behind their mother like bookends. Brooke sits opposite with Hope to her right and RJ to her left. Carter holds the paperwork, not as counsel, but as an officer of the moment. He will witness, not advise. Eric is there because legacy should see what the next generation chooses when the old ways stop working. Ridge takes the center chair. Taylor keeps her voice even. She restates the intent of the rulebook. She doesn't rehearse the past or relitigate Italy or list his failures. She names the fork in the road. You can sign and live by this with me, or you can refuse and release me to my future. Those are the only 2 honest choices. Her hands do not shake. Brooke speaks once so no one misreads her. I don't need him to sign rulebooks with me to know what I require. But I will not participate in any triangle again. If he signs for you and chooses you, I respect it and step back. If he refuses because he isn't ready to live clean, I also step back. Either way, today ends the blur. Hope squeezes her mother's hand and keeps her eyes on the table so the cameras in someone's pocket don't catch a tear and label it strategy. Steffi watches Ridge the way she watches a model on a runway before the hem hits a heel, alert, ready to act, unwilling to stumble. Carter reads the pact title for the record. Sincerity Pact. He points to the signature line. Ridge glances at the notary's seal like the official stamp will press into his skin. He picks up the pen. He doesn't sign. He talks. I wanted a romantic solution. A gesture. A ceremony that would reset reality. That's not real. This is. I have read this 10 times, and every line is reasonable. It asks me to do what I should already be doing. It's not a trap. It's a mirror. He breathes once long. I can't sign it today. The room does not explode. It compresses. Taylor inhales and then exhales like a doctor inside a complicated surgery who has just decided to call time. She nods once. She doesn't ask why. He tells her anyway. Because I would be signing a promise I'm not yet certain I can keep on the days when work and history and family collide. Because the truth is ugly. I am not finished with the reflex that put us all in this room. Because you deserve a man who already lives these rules, not one who needs a signature to try. He sets the pen down as if it weighs something. Brooke does not smirk, does not rescue, does not punish. She says, "Thank you for not lying." Steffi's jaw locks. Thomas looks at his mother, nod at Ridge, and waits for her cue. Taylor gives it, quietly. Then I keep my word. She stands, thanks Carter and the notary, kisses her children on the cheek, and turns to Brooke. Take care of yourself. Take care of the boundaries you set. I'll take care of mine. To Ridge, she says nothing sentimental. I hope you learn to love simple. She leaves the room, not dramatic, not slow, just done. That's the moment the past ends. The aftermath is brisk and adult. Within 48 hours, Taylor's license is transferred to a new base of operations, and a press release lands that she will be launching an international mentorship program for trauma-informed care, partnering with clinics that need more than good intentions. The itinerary doesn't look like escape, it looks like purpose. Rome for a kickoff symposium, Nairobi for a residency with a team building community-based interventions. Barcelona for a week with a nonprofit that integrates mental health into youth arts centers. Singapore for a policy roundtable that needs a clinician's clarity. Sydney for training modules. She takes calls from donors in multiple time zones and says yes to an advisory board seat that will put her on panels with people who can move policy and money. She books a modest apartment in the first city, not a penthouse, and sends Steffi and Thomas the address with a picture of a kitchen that looks nothing like a set. She is not running. She is moving forward at speed. The headlines try to frame it as heartbreak tourism. The footage refuses to cooperate. She looks rested, busy, and resolved. The door for love doesn't need her to kick it. It opens on its own. At a partner summit in Rome, a man whose name doesn't come with baggage. An international coordinator with a record of showing up in places where cameras don't, introduces himself not as a savior, but as a colleague. He listens more than he speaks and asks the only personal question that matters. How can I make your work easier? It isn't a wink, it's a baseline. Taylor recognizes an equal and doesn't grab for anything more. She is not auditioning. She is working, and that is exactly why the possibility lands as clean instead of as rebound. Back in Los Angeles, the fallout from Ridge's refusal recalibrates every relationship without a single screaming match. Steffi, who loves hard and protects harder, channels the sting into precision. She retools Forrester's internal culture guidelines in a week, telling HR that if the family can't model boundaries, they can at least codify them for everyone else. She holds her mother up in absentia by building a Mentor Monday speaker series at FC that brings in counselors and founders to talk about resilience, grief, and accountability. Attendance is optional and full. Thomas pours the energy into a pre-fall capsule that refuses crisis motifs and instead centers construction and calm, clean lines, honest seams, nothing hidden. The team calls it Clarity, and it sells on pre-order faster than anything the house has released in 2 years because the market can smell when a brand is telling the truth. Brooke keeps her deadline without weaponizing it. Ridge didn't meet it, and that answer is an answer. She does not pivot to Nick for comfort or threaten a timeline of her own. She focuses on work that is hers and on family that needs steadiness more than declarations. She sets her own personal rulebook without printing it for anyone. No private dinners with Ridge, no long debriefs that feel like couple therapy, no backstage passes to her quiet hour at the end of the day. When they do speak, they keep to the point. Children, company, the 1 or 2 decisions each week that truly require both of them. Hope sees what a line on a calendar can do and applies the lesson to her own life, setting a boundary date for a project and sticking to it even when it means saying no to a sponsor who assumed her yes was automatic. RJ posts a single photo of a handwritten note that reads, "Clarity is kindness," and leaves it at that. Eric tells Ridge in private that leadership starts at home. Donna brings cookies and silence to that conversation so the weight can settle without commentary. Carter closes the file on the pact and stores it, not as a relic, but as a compass. Someone will need a model for honest terms down the line. Ridge pays the price of a refusal that was also a confession. He loses the comfort of a default future, and he gains the discomfort that makes growth possible if he takes it. He keeps his focus where it belongs, on work that has to ship and on a family that must not be asked to referee his need for grace. He respects the distance Brooke sets and the distance Taylor enforces. He begins a version of the pact alone, without fanfare, logging the habits that move him toward honesty, trimming the conversations that used to blur, telling himself the truth in places where it hurts. He puts that work on the calendar with the same seriousness he gives a collection review. He tells no one because applause corrupts the first fragile steps. The city adjusts. The talk shows lose interest without fresh spectacle. The rulebook becomes story lore, and then becomes something better, a template whispered between friends when boundaries stops being a hashtag and starts being a plan. Taylor's mentorship program posts pictures of classrooms and clinics instead of selfies. A clip circulates in which she tells a roomful of new counselors that clarity saves time, and time is life, and it gets shared not because of who she once loved, but because of what she's building now. At home, Steffi and Thomas don't treat her absence like an open wound. They treat it like a new chapter and fly out when schedules allow. The first time Ridge sees a photo of Taylor with the colleague who might be more than that someday, he doesn't print it or break it. He sits with the feeling, calls his daughter to ask about her day, signs off on production notes, and goes to bed without a glass in his hand. The show doesn't need a twist to keep the stakes high because the choice itself was the twist. A man who often answers with motion answered with stillness and a no that honored the truth. A woman who could have waited again decided that waiting is not a personality trait. Another woman who once Chase chose to walk. The pact was never a trap. It was a test of readiness. Ridge failed the signature and passed the honesty. Taylor enforced the terms and found her way to a life that looks like hers. Brooke kept her deadline and her dignity. The children saw adults follow through. Forrester Creations, which has survived every kind of storm, absorbs this one and finds itself steadier, because clarity is good for couture and for people. There is no grand montage, just a city moving differently because a few people stopped lying to themselves. And if a new love steps onto Taylor's path while she is doing the work she loves, it will be welcomed in daylight, inside the same rules she wrote for herself. The rules that turned a triangle into a line, a deadline into a decision, and a decision into a future that doesn't need a stage to be real.